Right, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for the very first Coalition for Global Prosperity panel event at this year's Conservative Party conference. The Coalition for Global Prosperity is a non-profit, non-partisan organisation that exists to champion UK leadership in international development. And we believe that a strong development budget working alongside our defence and diplomacy experts means the UK can punch above its weight on the world stage and help those who need it most. We are delighted to be partnering today with Conservatives in foreign policy, and they work closely with Conservative decision makers, bringing together Conservatives and members of the wider society who are committed to a stronger Britain that harnesses its global leadership to advance the country's economic and security interests. There's some seats at the front as well for those coming in. So, research shows that international development and aid, when invested strategically, can reduce migration in the long run, especially when spent on education and infrastructure. But does this approach actually work? And how can it be effectively communicated to voters who are looking for immediate results? Domestically, a large chunk of the UK aid budget is now being spent at home on in-donor refugee costs, including asylum hotels. And this means less money is going to the countries that need it most and on programmes that support long-term stability. And this exceptionally high-level panel will discuss whether UK aid can reduce migration, what the best use of the aid budget should be going forward, and explore the lessons we can learn from other countries, such as the United States and Italy, who face similar challenges. So, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, the Right Honourable Sir Andrew Mitchell, MP. Sir Andrew was previously the Shadow Foreign Secretary and Deputy Foreign Secretary and the Minister of State for International Development and Africa in the Foreign Office. Sir Andrew was Secretary of State for International Development in the British government from May 2010 until he became Government Chief Whip in September 2012. And his award-winning autobiography, Beyond the Fringe, Tales from a Reformed Establishment Lackey, was published in 2022. Andrew, can UK aid stop the boats?
Right, I've got 4 minutes, is that correct?
Yeah, give us a second.
So let us be in no doubt that we have got to stop the boats because our constituents, the wider public, and politicians haven't really kept up with this, thinking that it is totally intolerable that people should illegally break into our country and then be able to stay. So that is why I very much welcome the decision that Kemi made yesterday, that if you come to this country illegally, you will not be able to stay. And also, people will note, in accordance with the 1951 Convention, that you are supposed to seek sanctuary in the first safe country you get to. And last time I looked, France was a safe country, in spite of any rumours to the contrary. Now, international development is profoundly on the back foot at the moment. Mel is having to work out what we do when we win the election and we inherit an ocean of debt which has got to be addressed. And development inevitably has to take a part of that, and what he is saying today is a figure into the 2030s, but nevertheless it is a further proposal to reduce international development spending. And of course it's encouraged by the fact that the Labour Party, for the first time ever in their history, have cut development spending. And who would have believed that a Labour government, when all those new Labour members promised to return development spend and to campaign for it to 0.7, would supinely just lie there while Keir Starmer reduced the budget in a very illogical way. Now, the case we have to make for development and for stopping the boats is that if you want to tackle pandemics, and never forget that it was a development grant that set off the process in Oxford, which led to the COVID vaccination being discovered and supplied all around the world. If you want to address the issues of climate change, which are key pushers of migration, if you want to address security, you have to work within a system of defence, diplomacy and development, which delivers on all those things. It's also about the UK's role in the world. Now, so specifically, leading on from that to what we are discussing today, you stop the boats by, first of all, making the announcement that Kemi has made yesterday. You also repair, as Rishi Sunak did, the relationship with the French, because you can't do any of this without cooperation from the French. We need more cooperation from the French, and you need to use the security services to try and deter further away from the channel the pull factors that are pushing people towards the coast. And we were doing that when we were in government, and we didn't say anything about it, but in breach of many of the conventions, Labour have said that. But you also need a deterrent, and that was the Rwanda scheme. And without a deterrent, you won't be able to stop the boats. And we know that's true because journalists went across to Calais and were told by numerous asylum seekers, people coming across the channel, that they were waiting for that nice Mr. Starmer to come into government so they wouldn't face the risk of going to Rwanda. So we know it was a deterrent, and Labour unwisely, in my view, removed that deterrent. Now, the key point I want to make is this. If you want to stop migration, you have to do it on a multinational basis, and you have to go back to the source of the problem. And the source of the problem is the appalling lives that people live, particularly in North Africa. And if you look at the World Bank estimates that have been published, you will see that over the next period of time, there's an expectation that there will be an increase in population in Africa of 600 million people, and that in the widest possible prospectus, there would be a maximum of something like 450 million jobs. So you're going to have 150 million people, 300 million people walking north towards prosperous Europe. And what I say is that we need a Marshall Plan. We need the EU and Britain and others too, in the Middle East, to get involved in a Marshall Plan, which would be a deal with these countries in North Africa, that we will put money into these countries to help them build up their structures, to help them train their young people. And then there's a deal for Europe to make, because we have a declining population in Europe, and in Africa they have increasing populations. There's a deal to be done, which is that we will take some of these people who are trained in North Africa into Europe on a temporary basis, and also provide for livings in North Africa. That is what a Marshall Plan would achieve, and that is the direction we should be going in. And if you want to solve the problems of migration, you need to do something like that, and you need an international development budget. But even more important, and I'll rest on this point, even more important, you need the skill set, which has now sadly been vaporized and dissipated, that Britain led the world. Under David Cameron's government, we were recognized as an international development superpower, and that we led the world in the thinking of how you tackle conflict and poverty in a way that not only makes life better in these countries for the people who we're trying to help, but also makes us safer and more prosperous here in Britain. So there is a lot of work to be done over the next few years, a lot of work that a Conservative incoming government is going to need to do to reassert those basic points and principles which I've tried to set out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Now, I'm delighted to introduce on my left the Right Honourable Nadhim Zahawi. Nadhim is a former Conservative Cabinet Minister and Member of Parliament for Stratford-on-Avon. During his time in government, Nadhim held several senior roles, including Chancellor of the Exchequer and Education Secretary, and he led the UK's world-leading COVID-19 vaccination rollout and oversaw the state funeral of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Nadhim, thank you for joining us. Can UK aid help stop the boats?
Thank you, Ryan. Look, I think we can all feel good about ourselves and come away from here thinking that we are an international aid superpower. The reality is very different. You know, we may not be a poor country, but we are, I think, a financially distressed country, as is France, as is probably Germany. I don't think the IMF can bail out both France and the United Kingdom. Let me just put some numbers around that. The deficit today is running at 5.3% of GDP. That's 148 billion pounds a year. The first five, that was 2024-25, by the way. The first 5 months of this year, which is April to August, it's running at 84 billion, 16 billion more than last year, and 11 billion more than the OBR predicted. So we are in financial distress. The money we're putting into overseas aid actually is money that we're borrowing. We're not running a surplus so that we can spread our largesse around the world. We're actually having to borrow this money. In terms of debt, the picture's even worse. It's 96.4% of our GDP, 2.9 trillion in debt. And that's with the magic of accountant speak, because it excludes the state pension liabilities. If you add those in, it's actually 12 trillion. Right? It is insane where we are today financially, and I think much of it rests at the obviously the issues that the current Chancellor is not dealing with. But let me just park that for a second and deal with the question of this fringe. Can aid stop the boats? Without a deterrent, you can't stop the boats, in my view. You know, we are blessed by having the English Channel. We can protect our borders if we choose to. On election night, when Keir Starmer had his victory speech and announced that he was going to scrap, literally on that first night, the Rwanda scheme, the processing of illegal crossings in Rwanda, my prediction was it will come back to haunt him and it will probably break his government ultimately. By the way, it won't just happen here, right? If you look at the world today, anything south of Libya, and I think Andrew touched on this, there's about 500 million people, 500 million people who are going to come under huge pressure, whether environmental, economic, and of course persecution. They're going to come under huge pressure to move, and moving becomes easier and easier. We clearly cannot, across Europe, absorb 500 million people, hence why you've got to deal with the problem upstream, which is today's question here. Now, aid, diplomacy, and defence is the right sort of three-pronged attack to try and deal with the problem upstream. On aid, I don't think we can do it on our own. I think we need to begin to think strategically, think about allies that can work with us, allies who know the territory, who know the geography, who know the people on the ground. You look at what the UAE is doing in Africa, right? It's about building capacity, building infrastructure, building capitalism, right? Unless you have economies that work in Africa, right, the problem is just going to keep recurring. There's no point just feeding it with more aid, in my view. Diplomacy, I think we really have a problem at the FCDO, and that's a problem that I don't think we can just blame this current government on. It's a problem that has been there certainly since I've been in Parliament, and probably before that under Blair and Brown, and that is too many of our diplomats today get promoted because they're very good at handling HR and management speak and writing management reports rather than doing statecraft and proper diplomacy. Today, if you want to apply to be, by the way, an ambassador in France, you can't put on your CV that you're fluent in French, or dare I say fluent in Arabic, because it might prejudice somebody else. It has to be a blind CV, right? And therefore, if the successful applicant can't speak Arabic or French, they have to go and learn it. It's mad, right, in my view, and we need to get much smarter at doing statecraft. And the third is on defence. I don't think we're doing enough, anywhere near enough, to understand what has happened to modern warfare. If you look at Ukraine, 80% of the casualties in Ukraine have come through drone attacks. And drone evolution has moved so fast in Ukraine. It started off with the sort of what I would call old drone technology, where the Russians were able to then jam it. And now today, it is moving towards AI drone technology. We're nowhere near, right? The government's made some announcements about AI and drones, but announcements are not real spending. You know, the German government has already put 150 million into autonomous drone technology. There are companies, by the way, that were, I think, partly born here and in Europe, like Henson, who've raised £1 billion to develop the first, I think, autonomous fighter jet. Are we really investing in these technologies in the United Kingdom? I think not. And so, in my view, we need to, one, get real about our financial position, and then get much smarter as how we do aid and link it to trade and capitalism, and then, of course, fix diplomacy and defence. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Nadhim. To my right, Dr. Ranj Alaaldin is the Director of Conservatives in Foreign Policy and a foreign policy specialist with over 20 years of experience covering international security, security sector reforms, hybrid warfare, UK foreign policy, good governance, track 2 diplomacy, and public sector reforms. Ranj obtained his PhD at the LSE and has held positions and fellowships at Columbia University, King's College London, the Brookings Institution, and Oxford University and the World Bank, where he is a senior consultant. Ranj, same question.
Thanks very much, Ryan. And let me start off by saying what an absolute privilege it is to partner with the coalition. I guess my remarks sort of build on Nadhim's three Ds, I believe it was, defense, diplomacy, and deterrence. And I think, all of us in this room can agree that containing conflicts, alleviating humanitarian crises, containing diseases, curing diseases is a good thing. But I don't think we live in an era, as Nadhim pointed out, where it's acceptable to spend tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions, if not billions, in the current political, economic climate, but also I'd say the wider socio-political climate, in that we have right now in this country resentment towards foreign policy as a whole, in fact. People are asking, why are we getting involved in certain quarters of the world when they're struggling to access basic healthcare, housing, and so on and so forth. So it really comes down to, I guess, how you make the argument for aid, but secondly, how you execute those endeavors. I think there's a lack of accountability when it comes to development, and this is probably unfair, but for the most part, it is a box-ticking exercise. Have we spent A? Have we liaised with B? Have we achieved enough to secure the next round of funding for this project or that institution? That's a simplification, of course, but it's just a rough sketch of where the picture lies. That doesn't mean there's no hope in aid. That doesn't mean there's no hope in inhibiting migration through development support, through development activities. But I think we need to be realistic about what's achievable in certain parts of the world and recognize our strengths. Alliances, as again Nadhim pointed out, is crucial to this. It's quite remarkable that in this day and age we still lack the collective structures for delivering and implementing aid. It's a very congested landscape out there, whether it's Africa, the Middle East, and so on and so forth. You've probably got hundreds of NGOs, civil society actors, a combination of domestic, local, indigenous actors, plus foreign actors who are all, I guess, vying for the same piece of the pie in one way or another. So there's an institutional problem there and an effectiveness problem that has to be addressed if indeed aid is going to inhibit migration. But coming back to the UK, I'm very familiar with the Middle East. And in the end, any policy has to be tied into the national interest. In this country, I don't think we've done that very well. And that's probably why aid budgets are on the decline. And the onus is on the proponents of development, of a more global, in quotation marks, Britain, to make the case, to make the justification for an enhanced aid budget, but also a sustainable one. This shouldn't be something that we revisit every year almost. It shouldn't be a low-hanging fruit that's very easy, let's say, or very straightforward for any a party or government to actually target and focus on when trying to make cuts here and there. So I think there has to be a holistic approach, a strategic approach at the same time. But also, look, if you go to most parts of the north, for example, beyond the London bubble, people won't have a clue about development. They won't have a clue about where their money, their taxes are actually going. And there's a huge problem there with the wider foreign policy discussion, in my opinion, in that we're not integrating different parts of our foreign policy together to achieve that holistic, effective, comprehensive, and sustainable approach, not just to aid, to migration, but to the wider foreign policy. And I think that's a bottom-up issue that has to be addressed as a kind of foundational approach to this particular topic. To answer your question very directly, Ryan, well, actually, it won't be direct at all. If aid was, if it was possible for aid to stop the boats, I think the numbers would probably be much lower. Migration numbers would be lower. But on the flip side, you could also argue that if it wasn't for development support, aid support, migration numbers could be a lot higher. And the issue here is, I guess this is really the crux of the issue. You can't really measure it. It's difficult to create, or I guess impossible to create a nexus between, let's say, the healthcare clinic that you've set up in country A, or the, let's say, humanitarian crises you've managed to resolve or contain, or the climate-related disaster you've managed to resolve or contain in some part of the world with migration numbers. And I don't think that's something which can be achieved at all, because there's just too many variables, too many dynamics involved when it comes to this particular topic. I will finish by going back to my earlier point about the need to integrate aid within a wider national interest framework, because I think foreign policy as a whole in this country has been too much about, abstract, vague, immeasurable concepts. Soft power, for example, we hear about very often, but I don't think there's anybody in this room that can tell me what soft power has achieved in practical terms, using numbers and data, in terms of what it means for your neighbors, for example, in terms of what it means, for the community or the group or the cohort or the individual that's struggling to get a job, for example. I'm going to raise this in perhaps the follow-up interventions, but there is a way, in fact, to orient, I guess, development around capitalism, as Nadhim pointed out, and we're seeing this happen in the US, where it's no longer acceptable over there to spend $100 million on some project, and that project just doesn't deliver any dividends for the American people, for the American state. I'll end there and I'll follow up later, Ryan.
Great, thank you very much, Ranj. Last but certainly not least, Resham Kotecha is Global Head of Policy at the ODI, where she leads public policy work along with efforts to work with governments to improve data ecosystems and data policy. Prior to working at the ODI, Resham worked as the Head of Policy at Wise, a FTSE-listed fintech company, leading policy work across Europe, the Middle East and Africa. Resham is Director of the Conservative Friends of India, Deputy Chair of the Social Mobility Commission, and what I think is the most impressive accolade, an Advisory Council member at the Coalition for Global Prosperity. Resham, over to you.
Thank you for that very kind introduction and brilliant remarks by my fellow panellists. So I think we can all agree that migration has become one of the defining political issues of our times, if not the defining issue. We know Reform is leveraging this. Labour's talked about tackling small boats the heart of its mission. And against this backdrop, it's clear that any party seeking to govern sustainably, particularly hearing the scary numbers Nadhim shared, must set out a credible long-term migration strategy. And too often our debate focuses on the short term, which is hugely important, the daily arrival numbers, the cost of asylum hotels, the immediate strain on the NHS and housing. And these are real pressures. We shouldn't dismiss them. But we also need to be thinking and focusing on the long term, because as these brilliant speakers have remarked, the drivers of legal and illegal immigration are rising. Whether we look at extreme weather, which is rendering entire regions uninhabitable, insecurity, conflict, terrorism, it's pushing millions and hundreds of millions from their homes. The World Bank has estimated, as you heard, that climate change alone could displace more than 200 million people. So migration is not a temporary crisis. It's going to be a defining feature of the rest of this century. And the central question is, what can we do here in the UK to prepare for that future while also addressing the very real challenges that we face today? And one part of that answer absolutely is how we deploy our aid budget. And evidence has shown in the past, when we've used our aid budget really effectively, thanks in part to the two former and current members of Parliament at this table, that when invested strategically in education, in infrastructure, in jobs, aid can reduce migration pressures. So I know we've heard a bit about deterrence. I'm going to talk a bit more about what we can do proactively with using the aid budget. And I'm proud to say, as Director of the Conservative Friends of India, that India is a really great success story in how we used our aid budget successfully for capacity building investment. So over a number of years, we used the aid budget to work with India as partners to invest in education, in public health, in financial inclusion, in electrification. And over time, that aid money, along with the efforts of the Indian government, shifted millions of people out of poverty. We shifted the aid budget then towards technical infrastructure, more into the financial system. We ended aid to India in 2015, and I know that was a point of contention for a lot of people. A lot of the investment in the later years was in things like climate change, in satellites, in elements that would really help with investment in infrastructure. And actually what we can see now is India is one of the top investors in the UK, supporting over 95,000 jobs. That was aid used as investment in a really smart way to build a trade partner for the present and for the future. An FTA was signed earlier this year, and that will boost bilateral trade by £25.5 billion a year. So that's a 39% estimated increase. It will add around £4.8 billion per year to GDP. I know that's not enough to tackle the numbers that Nadhim shared, but it's a start. The UK's exports are predicted to rise by 60% by 2040, so 15 years, and thousands of jobs are estimated to be created in aerospace, advanced manufacturing, and in technology. And I share that because I think it's really important. We hear a lot about the moral case for aid, and that's fantastic, but it's also really important to share that this is investment for Britain's future too. This is good for us, good for our children, good for future generations. But right now, a growing share of our UK aid budget is being used domestically on refugee costs. It's leaving less for the programmes overseas that actually build resilience. This is a strategic trade-off, one that we're not making strategically, and we need to interrogate that honestly. So it's not just a question of money. I spend my day job, my time looking at data and AI. And we actually need to utilise data and AI better so that we can anticipate migration pressures and therefore tackle them before they become crises. So this means harnessing data and AI to do things like combat signals from food prices, labour markets, climate forecasts, and conflict monitoring, so that we can intervene earlier and so that we can intervene more effectively. And we do already have examples of this working. So the World Food Programme has pioneered the use of AI-driven early warning signals so we can predict food insecurity. AI has been used to predict which households will be facing extreme food poverty. I'm talking about starvation, drought, in countries around the world that are challenged by droughts. And it can trigger early release of aid before famine really takes hold. So they've done this in places like Somalia and Ethiopia, and this approach has helped reduce displacement because people are able to stay in their homes rather than having to be forced to move to search for food. In Jordan and Lebanon, and CGP actually took us on a brilliant trip 2 years ago. They have been able to use the aid budget to fund digital cash transfer programs for many Syrian refugees. Biometric registration can be used to help with things like food and essentials and preventing fraud. And independent audits and open data reporting shows that this preserves dignity for true refugees, but also supports local economies. Another example comes with Italy's partnership with Niger and Libya. They've invested in digital border management. So they've been able to combine digital job matching programs and training schemes to create safer alternatives for young people. It's about encouraging opportunities at home rather than enabling people to leave because they feel they have no choice. And so AI-enabled labour market matching has actually helped to provide jobs for people. And finally, in the UK context, if we can build data ecosystems, we could better track people. And actually, our work at the ODI looks a lot at how data and AI can be used. When information is shared in the right way, it enables government policy to be more effective, and it enables trust to be built. And if we want to build public confidence at home, we need more transparency about how UK aid is used. And actually, that transparency, dashboards, evidence to the public would help us to maintain pressure on the areas where we think aid money is being wasted and where we think it could be more strategically used. The United States has also tied development funding to job creation programs. Italy has combined aid with labour pathways. There's a lot of different ways in which we could use technology to support the more effective use of aid to try and support people to stay in their homes. And that's good for British security, it's good for British safety, it's also good for trade and the economy. So I look forward to discussing further with the panel, but I would strongly urge us in any conversation about aid budget spending and the migration challenge to really think about harnessing technology and data in a more effective way so that we can actually get ahead of the crises and prevent some of the challenges and pressures on the UK economy we're facing today.
Great. Thank you very much, Resham, and to all our panellists for kicking us off so well. If you're stood at the back, there's a few seats at the front, if you'd like to grab them. It's a big subject, and it's a packed room, so we're going to take some questions now. Can I have a show of hands, just so I can gauge who's interested in asking questions? Great. I think, gentleman, Beatrix, to your left was first up.
Thank you very much. A very interesting speeches by each of the panel. I have just come back from Central Africa, having revisited Zambia, where I used to work as an accountant at the Kabwe mine. I was struck, particularly in Zambia, that of the copper being transported by road rather than rail, seemed to be a lack of acumen in the management of the economy, and backhanders everywhere, and potential Chinese recolonization of Africa, which I was disturbed about. What I think is required is is effective management and help supervise the economies of so many countries, not just dishing out money to them. They should be viable. And it's also the international banking system and the way that overseas investors are actually targeting and paying money to whoever. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's take one more. Just lady at the front.
Thelma Mattock from Royal Sutton Coalfield. I keep hearing the slogan, smash the gangs, smash the gangs. The Conservatives, unfortunately, didn't smash the gangs, and the Labour government haven't done that so far. So why haven't we been able to smash the gangs?
Thank you. Okay, Andrew and then Nadhim, if that's okay.
So on Zambia, I mean, Zambia hasn't had, I think I stopped any significant spending in Zambia many years ago when I was the development secretary. Zambia's done quite well. It's a middle-income country now. It's certainly a lot less corrupt than many of its neighbours, and it's got a pretty good president. HH, I think, is regarded as doing quite a good job there. He's from a younger generation of technocrats, and Zambia benefits, I think, from that. But your point about the Chinese in Africa is a very important one, and you can see what the Chinese are doing, and you can view it through the glass half full or the glass half empty. But what is not in doubt is the withdrawal, and there'll be effectively no British or American bilateral programs in Africa within a year or so, has opened up a void which will be filled by people who are not friendly towards us and do not share our values or beliefs, to wit, China and Russia. And British foreign policy and our ability to try and stand up for the countries and the beliefs that we hold will be greatly diminished by that. On smashing the boats from Thelma, from the royal town of Sutton Coalfield, we haven't smashed the gangs because we're not addressing some of the issues which I and indeed Nadhim set out about what you do upstream to stop the movement. And the gangs, which are the modern equivalent of the slave trader, put people in leaky boats, a small percentage, but a large number of whom perish in the waters of the channel. You can't, there's no immediate way of destroying their business model, but there are things which you can do and which we were doing to try and damage their business model. In the end, I do think that if you were to reverse it, and if it was people coming from Britain to France, I think there'd be one hell of a fuss from France about Britain just allowing people to come across the channel into their territory. And we need a much closer relationship with France to try and stifle the flow of people, but we need, above all, to do it upstream. And upstream is not just in Europe, it's in Africa. And that's why the point I made about the Marshall Plan, I think, is so important, because it can't be done by individual countries. It's got to be done by countries moving together. And I gave you the World Bank figures, which show, a rising population and not enough economic activity. Where are those 300 million feet going to start to walk? They're going to start to walk to richer countries, and that means Europe.
Thank you for that. I think on the issue of around corruption, you're absolutely right. It is one of the greatest challenges that you'd face in delivering the outcomes that we all want to see, which is sustainable economies in those countries. I take Andrew's word for it about Zambia is on a sort of trajectory towards improving that, but I'm skeptical. You look at countries like Eritrea that has, I think, a president who's a Marxist, clearly under massive influence from the CCP, and of course Djibouti next door. By the way, Eritrea is second only to Afghanistan of the second highest number of illegal crossings using these inflatables across the channel. There is an opportunity, by the way, and the opportunity is thus two-tiered in my view. One is technology, so whether it's the banking system, AI, clearly, as Resham touched on earlier, if we are able to say the quid pro quo to a government, whether it's Zambia or other governments, is that they have to put in technology that takes the sort of the cash element out of the system, you begin to bear down on corruption. You're seeing it now in places that I'm more familiar with, like look at the Kurdish region in Iraq. They've implemented My Account, where all civil servants now are paid digitally. That gets rid of the corrupt influence, the corruption in the system, and the rent seeking by powerful elements of that. And so that's one. The second, by the way, and here's the elephant in the room, right? Many of these countries are being infiltrated not just by the sort of the China influence, but by the Muslim Brotherhood, Islamism. Right? You see it in Sudan, you see it in other parts of Africa, and we have allies, right? Strategic allies who've been investing both in the UK and in Africa, like the UAE, who say, look, you've got to deal with some of this stuff, right? Why aren't we talking to them? These are countries in the Middle East who've stopped sending their students to our country, to our universities, because they're worried about them returning home, being radicalized, right? We're not dealing with these issues that are difficult to deal with, but we should be addressing them, in my view, as part of the overall strategy for aid. Thelma, on your point, it's human nature, Thelma, right? It's a great soundbite, sounds wonderful, but as Rob Jendrick demonstrated in that very good expose, if you are a French police officer, you'd rather some of these people actually get off your land, get out of your country. Why would you? Not. It doesn't make any sense. So I get all the people who say, let's have closer relations with Iran. It will make no difference without a deterrent. If we don't send the message that if you arrive here illegally, you'll be processed the next day in Rwanda, not in the United Kingdom, right? And you watch the numbers drop. Trump has done it, right? We can do the same thing, in my view. Why haven't we implemented emergency legislation? We did it during the pandemic, right? It's a national emergency. In my view, you've got, the numbers, 60,000 people crossing a year, maybe even higher this year. It is a national emergency. That's how we should be dealing with it. That's what the nation expects.
Ranj, you hinted earlier that you might have some policy recommendations for us. How can the UK, thinking strategically, leverage its development budget to respond to some of these crises?
Well, look, I think on the smashing the gangs point, in a lot of these countries, we have the presence with our allies. And we are investing time and resources into building institutions such as the army, the military, a conventional security force. And I think one way to smash the gangs is to find local partners, but serious and credible local partners that have the muscle, quite frankly, to push back, to contain, and at some point eliminate some of these networks, because that's what they are. They're a network. They're transnational networks. They've got leadership in European countries, the Frances, the Germanys, the Hollands, and they've got very sophisticated banking networks, financial networks. It's almost akin to the war on drugs. And in this particular instance, you're not confronted with an enemy that is as, let's say, systematic as the cartels are. But they could be eventually, and they will find ways of adapting to things like AI and more effective data gathering, more effective anti-money laundering mechanisms. So finding a local ally in those countries is important. Now, the Europeans tried it in Libya, and what they found out eventually was that the groups they were giving money to were in fact smugglers themselves. They simply put on different uniforms. They transitioned from being, let's say, informal underground operators to above ground formal members of a state-sanctioned force backed up by European money. So you've got to be very shrewd in those instances. I don't think we can partner very well with governments per se, because governments, or like our government, just simply have too much on. They lack the bandwidth, the expertise maybe. There's institutional myopia. So you've got to find those actors on the ground who can come in. But of course, you don't want to start partnering with actors who are complicit in, massacres and crimes against humanity. So there has to be a vetting process for that. Coming to the policy recommendations, very, very briefly. Look, it's often said that conflict is the cause of migration, and the boats and so on and so forth are a symptom of that. That's partly true, but also conflicts themselves are a symptom of something far more deep-rooted in these countries. That could be anything from ethnic and sectarian grievances to the lack of functioning institutions, to the lack of a viable army. It could be governments themselves playing a proactive role in fueling migration as a weapon, as we saw with Gaddafi back when he was in power in Libya, as we've seen with other countries, without naming names, who look to migration as a kind of mechanism to enhance their bargaining position, their negotiating power with Western countries, including the UK. So, there's a number of different things that have to be done and combined. But like I say, it's a combination of carrots and sticks that we have to adopt more effectively, but with a sustainable strategy. It can't be ad hoc, knee-jerk, reactive, short-term responses. There actually has to be a serious strategy and serious dedication and resources committed to it.
Thank you. Okay, some more questions. Gideon, to your right.
Hi there. Morning. Gideon Rabinovitz from Bond, the membership organisation for international charities in the UK. So we understand the imperative, the political imperative, and the importance of winning back trust of the UK public to properly manage our borders. And I completely agree with Andrew and the other panellists that this needs to be a sort of coordinated global effort. We need to work with our European and other global partners on this. But how do we deal with the inevitable tension that emerges with a UK stance that would essentially be saying, well, we're on the edge of Europe, we have this body of water that allows us to sort of protect ourselves and keep as many migrants out as possible. We're not going to deal with, for a period at least, whilst we are dealing with these pressures, our fair share of the number of people that are crossing into the continent. We're going to stand on the edge of Europe and not contribute to the efforts to challenge and deal with this problem. How do we deal with the inevitable tension of that sort of stance and the need to actually build proper alliances with other partners across Europe and the world to tackle these problems long term? And just one other point, a more personal reflection. I think these issues are very complex, they're very sensitive, they need to be dealt with very carefully. I think the suggestion that there are hundreds of millions of people waiting to just come into Europe is not a very helpful reflection. I see it as scaremongering, and it doesn't help us deal with these issues very calmly. So thank you.
Let's take one more. This gentleman here.
Richard O'Connell, President, South Devon Conservative Association. With regards to the boats coming across the channel, what would happen if we said to the French, we will take 1,000 migrants a week, we will send our own boat across, and we charge them €2,000, which they charge the smugglers for bringing them across. And that's £2 million a week, which we put into our border control and ship them out pretty quick. We then say to the French, any rubber boat which is coming across. In exchange for this, we will turn back, and you must accept them back again. So we're opening up a humanitarian route across. We're getting paid for it. We're getting £2 million a week, which they're not paying the smugglers. So the smugglers would stop immediately, in my opinion, so long as the French would take the boats back again. And we take 1,000 in, get them sorted out with the £2 million quickly, and ship them back out again, the ones that aren't for political asylum. Now, you can't charge people for giving them asylum, but while they're in France, they're not claiming asylum. So we can pick them up with a boat, bring them across, and then they pay us €2,000, and we use that to sort the problem.
Nadhim, as a highly successful entrepreneur and businessman.
Richard, can I give you some numbers? So £2 million a week is what? So 4 weeks in a month, that's 8 million, right? It's costing us currently 175 million a month to put them up in hotels. That's the current run rate, right? Two, what kind of message does it send to the world that actually we're just going to throw in the towel and decide that we're going to run a system just based on who can pay rather than who's eligible and law-abiding, right? I think Andrew said it earlier. France is a safe country. I had this argument with John McDonnell on Sky a few weeks ago because he was saying this is inhumane that we're doing. France is a safe country. It's just not as generous. The pull factor to the UK is much greater. When you go and talk to those people who are trying to get onto these boats, it's mainly because of economic migration. That is the reality on the ground. We need, in my view, a deterrent. Plus, of course, you do need, as Gideon quite rightly outlined, safe and legal routes for people to apply for asylum. I came to this country fleeing Saddam Hussein, not as an asylum seeker, as a migrant, right? So we need those routes. You're right. I just don't think we're dealing with the emergency today. Until you fix the roof, the economic roof of this country, we're borrowing at, what I think 30-year rates is 5.55% today, right? I think Liz resigned when it got to 5%. I was then CDL, I had left the Treasury, right? We're borrowing at 5.55%, Gideon, to do this stuff. So let's make it effective, in my view. Until we are running a surplus, I don't think we can be as generous as people would like us to be. It's a hard truth, but at least we need to begin to think about it. I promise you, what you're going to see across Europe is governments falling unless they deal with this issue.
Resham, to Gideon's point, how do we strike the balance between the political imperative and scaremongering?
So I will come to that, but one thing I wanted to say, based on the figures, 175 million a week, if we're talking about innovative, or perhaps not innovative, one of the things I've never understood is, for 175 million pounds a week, if we assumed an asylum processing officer was paid £40,000, we could have 4,500 if we used 1 week's worth of hotel money. The average claim length of time for an asylum application in 2024 was 13.5 months to get an initial response. So we are keeping people in hotels at taxpayers' expense for over a year before their initial asylum application gets processed. To me, that is absolutely ludicrous. We should be investing in the processing. And whether you agree with the outcomes, around 50% of claims, the initial outcome is a successful grant of leave or protection. Some are appealed, the rates can be higher, some are overturned, but we're looking at roughly 50%. If we process that within the first week or even the first month, we would save huge amounts on hotel costs, and we could actually support a lot of these asylum seekers, whether they should be claiming here or not, are highly educated and come from great backgrounds. We could actually have them working after the first month, not after the first 13.5 months. So to me, I've always found that ludicrous, that we delay and we could just invest into the actual system. I agree there needs to be deterrence. And I agree with you, the challenge is how you balance that. And I think actually, post-Brexit, there's been a lot of, it's kind of felt retaliatory and punishing to the British, that we don't want to help manage this issue from the outside, obviously not being kind of in Parliament or in government. But I think the real challenge is that this is a problem we're all facing. And I think part of the attraction is, as you say, a very generous system in Britain. People are attracted to Britain. They come through France for it. If we had a more effective deterrent and a more effective processing system here, we would attract fewer people travel through France. It would help them if it helped us. So I do think there is that argument to be made that if we were less attractive to kind of illegal boat crossings, that would help France, because lots of people come through France only to come to Britain. They don't want to be in France. So if we made it less appealing, they would not be in France either.
Andrew.
I mean, but the point is that these conventions, the 1951 convention, are now completely not fit for purpose because they were set up before there was mass travel. It's a very different environment. But the problem is that once you open a negotiation on the convention, every country's got the thing that they want, and so you're opening a Pandora's box. You never get the lid shut on it. So it is enormously complex. I agree with what Gideon said, but I just want to say, the scaremongering argument is a very dangerous argument, because I gave you very specific figures. These are World Bank figures, and they are awesome. And it's not scaremongering to put facts on the table. And the point which I think Nadhim alluded to is true. If I'm a passionate supporter of this Labour government sorting out the crossings of the Channel, because if they don't, that will be the Tories who fail to do it, Labour who fail to do it, and perfectly decent constituents of all of ours will say, well, neither of the two main parties have done it, we're moving elsewhere. And that's what you're beginning to see. So it's very important indeed that the credibility for resolving problems is done by the Labour and the Conservative Party. And people are resentful of the fact, as I said in my opening remarks, that politicians have not kept up with their extreme detestation of people coming to our country illegally and then being here, claiming benefits, stopping their children going to doctors' surgeries and so on. That must be addressed by the main parties, or it will be addressed by the extreme parties. It's terribly important. So I think you're wrong about scaremongering. Let's put the facts on the table. And those facts are what lead me to believe, firstly, that you've got to do it on a multinational basis in terms of resolutions. And secondly, is why I talk about a Marshall Plan. Look at the huge benefit of the Marshall Plan, quite controversial at the time it was introduced, to put a lot of money into defeated enemies. But actually, in the long term, it was clearly the right thing to do. So you have to think very big, and you have to think upstream. Finally, the last Conservative government increased by 1,000 people the number of those who were processing asylum cases. In my view, following the Rwanda legislation, the bill, because a clause was put into it which said that anyone sent to Rwanda was an eligible asylum seeker and could seek asylum from Rwanda, I think that would have got past much of the problems with the courts. And so, as others on the panel have said, you have got to have a deterrent. And the fact that Labour got rid of the deterrent is one of the reasons why these numbers have risen. And again, I give you the evidence that the media went to Calais and they asked people why they were coming here. And there were a variety of reasons, but the predominant answer at the time was, we are waiting, we're not coming across until that nice Mr. Starmer is in government, when we know we'll be able to stay in Britain.
Thank you. Right, let's two more questions. Gentleman at the back's been very patient.
This morning, the fifth French Prime Minister has just resigned, so the French government has once again fallen. Can I just ask, are we really being naive that this even appears on the to-do list in France?
Let's take one more. Any takers? Yep, gentleman, back, front.
Thank you. Recognising what Nadhim was saying about the financial challenges that we face, I'm quite interested in Sir Andrew's point about this Marshall Plan. Is there the appetite to work together with our sort of colleagues and partners to the scale of the investment that's required to do that, particularly when you consider what our strategic competitors are able to invest in this space? And do you think there's the appetite not just internationally to do that, but through your former department as well?
And then, did you have your hand up, sir? Yep, go for it.
My name is Mazia. Thank you, panel, for this Fringe event. So my main question and topic, like my agenda for this question is, personally, I have a very good connection with Iraq and Iraqi Kurdistan, and we have a big problem with rural immigration. A lot of people from rural areas usually come here, to see the economic haven. They see this as wealthy, even though passing through many other countries in Europe. The big problem there is that there's drying rivers due to the dams in Turkey, so a lack of farming infrastructure, climate is being ruined there, and a lack of investments. So one example is I went to take a trip on Pishder district, and there's villages and towns like Kaladze, Rania, and there's barely any prospects or job opportunities for young people. And most of these Iraqi immigrants coming from Kurdistan are usually people in my age group from 18 to 25. It's really devastating to see that people don't see any job aspects there and just come over here and do horrible things, gangs and so on, or just claim benefits and see as a free way to get money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. I'll ask each panellist to speak for 45 seconds and then we'll finish promptly. So starting on my right with Ranj, and we'll go across.
Well, 45 seconds. I mean, look, let me finish by saying that most countries in the world determine, evaluate, formulate their policies based on a certain set of norms which tend to be tied into what they believe is a kind of an ideal political order. In this country, we've had distortions, we've had the debate go from right to left. We haven't quite articulated or worked out what we as a country want when it comes to immigration. And it's just become too noisy and like I say, full of distortions. And until I think we have an understanding of what our social contract is or what it should look like, I don't think we're going to make much progress when it comes to the immigration debate. How we achieve that social consensus is an entirely different discussion altogether. Perhaps we could convene a panel on that next year, Ryan, on how to devise a consensus within our political, our social order when it comes to immigration. And unfortunately, in my opinion, until we've got that social contract, that consensus, we're going to continue to struggle with this debate.
Thank you. Andrew.
So I'm going to leave Nadhim to answer the question on Iraq, which he'll do much better than me. On the to-do list in France, remember that France has a very strong local mayoral disaggregated power system. And if you talk to the people in Calais who run the area there, whatever's happening in Paris, they're very aware of this because it's an issue which loses them votes as well. So I don't think you should regard the chaos in Paris necessarily making matters worse. And on the whether you can actually get people together, it is the scale of the challenge which is mounting, which will bring people together. And that's why, Italy is saying that they were going to send £30 million to try and deter people coming from North Africa into across the Mediterranean, or Keir Starmer saying he was making a big announcement, he's adding £30 million to the business of trying to stop people coming across. It's not going to work. It's a waste of taxpayers' money. And so as people recognise the scale of the problem, which I'm not the only member of the panel who's set out today, then there will be a greater insistence from their electorates that they come together to do something about this, because it is a very big issue, but there are ways of making it better. Finally, the scale of the problem this country faces, and it's not just us, it's France and Germany and others too, of rising debt and an ocean of debt is very real. And so whether you are talking about international development or mending the roads in Royal Sutton Coldfield, you've got to justify it, because all expenditure needs to be justified. Every single penny needs to be justified. It's why we set up the Independent Commission of Aid Impact when David Cameron became Prime Minister. You've got to justify every penny. And the problem which we have at the moment, quite apart from the general incompetence of the government, is they have lost the ability to control expenditure because their backbenchers will not allow the executive to do it. It's a very, very serious issue, and that's why I think we have to see the debate we've had today in that context as well.
Thank you. Nadhim.
I think the bigger problem with France, I have to say, is French financial crisis. France is a much worse place than we are in terms of both post-pandemic deficit is moving completely in the wrong direction. Productivity, which used to be their big thing, is also moving in the wrong direction. So France economically is in a much worse, much more precarious position than we are currently, albeit with all the terrible numbers I outlined at the beginning of this discussion. And so a French economic crisis is looming, in my view, and that will make the pull factor even greater to us. Now, on a positive note, the British economy is much more resilient. 80% of our economy is services, which is digital, legal, accountancy, marketing, everything else, out of that 3 trillion of GDP. 20% is manufacturing, the wings for Airbus and Rolls-Royce engines and so on. But nevertheless, in my view, much more recoverable if the Chancellor does the right thing and makes this country the best place to live and build a business. Appetite to work together. It's going to be really interesting to see a couple of things. One, I think there are countries in Africa today doing amazing things, like the UAE, doing as close as you can get to that, sort of injecting capitalism into those economies, who would be very open. They see themselves as a strategic partner to the United Kingdom of partnering in Africa. The bigger one, and I have to say credit to President Trump, is what will happen in Gaza. To get all the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Turkey, Indonesia, all to come together. And if Hamas does deliver the hostages and then actually surrenders, the rebuilding of Gaza is going to be a great outcome of real appetite to work together, albeit, of course, led by the United States of America. We'll be there with them. On the very specific point on Kurdistan and Iraq, a really well-made point. It's been 2.5 years that the Kurdish, Turkish oil pipeline has been shut down by the Baghdad government, by the federal government, to effectively punish the Kurds. It lost $28 billion of actual income for Kurdistan and for the rest of Iraq, which would have created the jobs and prosperity. It got restarted about a week ago, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and credit to the Iraqi Prime Minister, Sudani, who's actually really was determined to get this going, but only because the Americans really stepped in terms of statecraft and diplomacy. We were there to support, of course, but nevertheless, back to the point about having really strong ambassadors in some of these countries that need our help makes a real difference. What could have Iraq done with 28 billion additional income in terms of creating those jobs in Rania and elsewhere? Which really brings us back to the point that we discussed at the outset. I will end with this point, and that is, I think, the way to move forward and support the Coalition for Prosperity, and of course, everybody who's trying to do the right thing vis-a-vis the rest of the world, because we don't live in isolation, is to get our house in order first. Right? Until you get your house in order, it's much harder to do some of this stuff when you're having to borrow the money.
Thank you. Resham, final word.
Super speedy. On your question, it's a really valid one. There's lots of really fascinating uses of AI and technology. There are agri-tech startups experimenting in Kurdistan and kind of surrounding regions that are looking at pioneering systems that can, for example, use 90% less water. We're also able to use AI to predict droughts, so you can manage reservoirs and manage crops accordingly to what's best. So slow and steady, but I'm a great believer in the potential use of AI as we do the testing. So the UK can absolutely be giving advice and guidance. It doesn't always have to be money. I know we've stepped out and left voids for China. Because of financial strain, as Nadhim said, we are borrowing to fund any aid. But actually, we've got a great deal of expertise on data, AI, technology, financial inclusion, financial standards, a whole range of things that we can offer even if we don't have the money to do so. And I think it's really important that the UK continues to utilise its soft power, its knowledge, its expertise around the world to build kind of a safer, stronger world, but also more security for the UK.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Can we thank our panel in the usual way?